can pet the cat, you can ignore the cat. Okay. Hello witches, and welcome back to Activist Witches, where we discuss witchcraft and...
Activism?
You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they.
You can call me Raven, and my pronouns are they, them.
And in today's video, we're going to have a discussion, really, which is why Raven is here, about how to break intergenerational curses, which was the video most voted for by you, my lovely viewers, on the community tab on YouTube, which from time to time is how we choose these videos. And without any further ado, let's get into that.
Haven't we forgotten someone?
And this is Stella, and his pronouns are uncertain, but generically him, them. Generically, at times. He's the longest and tailest kitty, and still at longest. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi. And on there you can do a one-off donation, a monthly donation, or even get a tarot reading with me, Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And for the month of January 2025, you can still get a year-ahead reading with me, which includes your year card. And for the foreseeable future, all my profits from tarot reading go directly to support Coaches to Gaza, who are part of the mutual aid groups that support Palestinian people evacuate and relocate to Egypt. So if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. Also, don't forget, we are in phase 2 of Witches for Palestine. The Raffle prize draw is imminent, but you still have a chance to enter by donating from as little as £5. All the details on how to join are down in the video description below. When I gave this as an option to the community poll, what I actually meant was more human than magical, but I think that the two things can come together. And probably because of what I've been reading recently, which is mainly, if you've seen on Instagram, Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici, I genuinely am starting to believe that family, community, all those natural things are in a way part of witchcraft, and it's part of the reason why capitalism tries or has tried very hard to take them away from us. Hence, my idea of breaking generational curses being, let's not repeat the mistakes of our families, of our parents, the behaviors and the things that they did to us, and that if we don't break, we'll do to others, because we have been told that that's how things are going to be. It's just how things are supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think like on a magical level, these kind of issues that are passed down, these belief systems and feelings of inadequacy or self-esteem, or any of the other fucked up things that parents can pass down to us, will interfere in magical workings. Like if you're not aware of those things, if you're not taking stock of them, then they can interfere in what you're trying to do. It's like in the Magician's book series and television show, there are things called circumstances, which are, say, like the elevation that you're at, the position of the moon, the position of the planets. Okay. And these are all aspects that you have to bring into your magic, and you need to calculate and you need to adjust for to be able to get to the result that you're actually looking for. So, yeah, a lot of this stuff is really just acknowledgement and awareness, because otherwise, when it comes to things like the shadow self.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, there's a lot that, from what I understand of the shadow self and shadow work, comes indubitably from trauma. And let's be honest, most trauma that endures with results starts in childhood. And for it to happen in childhood, it happens with people that are close to you, vis-a-vis your relatives and parents. Mm-hmm. There's a premise that probably I need to make in the fact that I am partial. I am now estranged from both my parents. And there is probably something that I might bring to you as a solution by the end, which is talking about families of election. However, and as much as it's not in my interest to point this out, you know the saying, blood is thicker than water, which I think especially in witchcraft circle goes around saying, oh no, you know what, originally it was the blood of the covenant or the coven is thicker than the water of the womb, so of the family. So technically should speak about agreements and pacts made between people, like in a coven of witches, are stronger than blood ties. I would love for that to be historically correct, that that's the original sentence. It's not the case. That's a very new thing that has been tried to claim. I love it. I think it's better. But the idea that family is blood and it's closer to you because it's blood goes back to Roman times. And don't worry, it is problematic. These are notes that I have as like, yeah, blood is thicker than water. And thick blood clots and kills you. Something that you pointed out, and I am very grateful for, is some kind of basics for this discussion, which is on a systemic level. Like, we tend to believe that, families are a personal thing. We all have one, and we might see overarching themes. But, it's a very individual thing. It hasn't always been like that.
No, I mean, even in the UK locally, you can pinpoint a lot of the ideals that we live with today, but had been living with for a while, with that Margaret Thatcher quote.
There's no such a thing as society.
Only people and families.
Oh.
And that's very much like a reinforcement and a concentration of the idea of individualism. But the individual includes the family unit, the nuclear family.
Yeah.
And why is the nuclear family so important for the society that doesn't exist, apparently?
Because capitalism.
Yeah.
Let's not fool ourselves. Thankfully, again, I can bring you these at a time where I'm learning historically the actual brute force that was imposed by the ruling class onto the proletariat. Most people that have to work to live, like you and me, we rely on welfare, which is in a way even worse according to society.
The society that doesn't exist.
The society that doesn't exist. Because before the introduction of capitalism and individualism and Cartesian theory about self-responsibility and mind over matter, we were based on community, not just on a human level, but on a earth level as well, like the common land that was of the village, that was the place where everybody would go. The idea that children would be raised by the village rather than by the parents, which is something that personally I still sort of experienced, because in my village, it's farmer village, I spoke about it before when I was raised in Italy, I never had a babysitter, but I was constantly left with older women, with other nonnas around the village, and I didn't realize until hearing how different it was in this country and for other people, like people that are close to us, children are babysat until what age? Like, they're not left alone, or they're not left with just, if they're lucky, they're left with relatives.
I don't know, in the 90s we really moved on from that idea, and we did just start leaving kids at home by themselves.
Okay.
I don't know if we do that now.
But there's this thing about reducing the social point of reference from a multitude of people to a supposed couple of parents and their children and maybe the grandparents very significantly reduces not only the influences that we have, but the people that we can go to if one of these authority figures wrong us.
And I'd say, one of the key understandings of how trauma works in the field of psychology is that it's not so much the event that happens to you as it is the emotional support that you get afterwards. Like, you can go through something traumatic and end up not having trauma about it if you then are given what you need to process it there and then. It's the inability to process it and the unavailability of support to process it that leads it to become a trauma, because your brain has to stick it into a dark corner somewhere because it can't deal with it by itself.
Because realistically, especially when you go through trauma as a child, because I don't know if you've ever heard, I really hope that you haven't heard this from your parents, but when you go and lament to them something, then they go, oh, no parent is perfect, oh, I couldn't do anything right then, which is a very easy way to avoid accountability and responsibility. It's not that a parent ever needed to be perfect, but if we don't have anyone else to then go and check with, verify with, like there's some kind of behavior that as children we don't understand but we feel uncomfortable with, and we have no one else to go to, and we still have to live with our caretaker, which is the only person that we depend from to survive. That's why trauma creates this sort of split and this association. Like, I know that I can't trust you, and I don't really like you, and I don't think that this is right.
But I got no one else.
And you feed me, and you remind me constantly that I live under your roof, and therefore under your rules. And if I am 4, 8, 12 years old, even 16 years old, I still have to very much accept to bend my head. And when we're younger, I think it's even more of a necessity to create a story that justify our parents and our adult relatives, because they're adult. We are very much in a society that considers children and anyone really under 18 as the possession of whoever made them, which is a very, again, capitalistic way to look at things. We have reproduced the labor that will be the arms of the generation, of the next generation, that will produce work and value for capitalism, and therefore that is part of the capital that is the only capital that as proletariat you can have, which is the next generation that you've made. You own them. You have the delusion of thinking that you have a right to shape them into what you want. And there is a point about unconditional love that I think we need to talk about.
Yeah.
I don't know, again, I correct me if I'm wrong, but everywhere in society we are told that parents are parents. Parents is where unconditional love comes from. They will be the ones that will always love you because there's the blood. I worry that because society and culture have repeated that for so long, we have got to the point that we believe it by repetition.
Yeah.
And so we don't get into looking at it and dissecting it and going, what is love and how does it manifest? And is this love then? We do not question that. We are not put in a position where we can ever question that whatever a parent does is love. To the point that then we are taught about tough love. And I was like, oh, you just don't understand that that's love, but that's still love. Which I don't feel is necessarily correct.
I think there's another side to it as well, which is that being a parent is a huge responsibility, and you could argue that it actually is probably too big of a responsibility to stick onto just two people.
Yeah.
To give someone an entire lifetime of stuff that they're going to carry with them based on what you do in those first 18 to 20 years or so. Like, there's a huge responsibility to get that right. And especially now in late stage capitalism, where you have just as much of a responsibility to keep your job,
Gosh,
and financial responsibilities as well. Like, when that's all piled on top of things, I don't really see how anyone can get it right.
Which is pretty much the reason why we get this intergenerational trauma. Like, the concept of intergenerational trauma was first applied to people of heritages that have shared collective trauma, like think African American and the heritage of slavery that they have. So that, of course, creates a societal collective trauma. But even when it's passed down generation by generation, because the needs and the natural way and order of things has been disrupted, starting in the 15th century, again, taking away the common land and going more and more nuclear towards the family rather than the community.
And it being about production of goods as opposed to production of sustenance.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, there's a lot that personally I didn't know before starting to read Caliban and the Witch about. We have this perception that, we find Roman coins, so money has always been there, hasn't it? And there's always been commerce, so you produce things to sell. But realistically, on a practical level, up until the 15th century, we used to produce what we needed to consume. Specifically, actually, the serf in feudalism would need to produce for themselves to consume, and then the tax to pay the lord because they own the land. Why did they own the land and not the serfs? Because divine right. There's another kind of worms that we're not going to open now. But there's this thing about some people do not understand, think that capitalism does not involve them. Whilst realistically the entire society that we have now, even in the way that it affects families and responsibilities and raising children and the demands that we put on the next generation, do all come from the fact that capitalism is not a natural state for us. The natural state were communities, villages, work in the common land without feeling the need for that to be private property, which does not mean personal property. People always had personal property. But the idea of private property where a piece of land is just of someone and you have to pay, therefore, if they have the piece of land that has the house, you have to pay them, and da-da-da-da. It's all of that taking away and then making self-reliance necessary, and then self-reliance is about you and the people that you decide are part of your family, which is who you marry into, and then the only thing that you can own, because it's your blood, which is therefore your prole, your children.
It's not to say that feudalism is inherently a better system.
Absolutely
that we
not.
should be living under. It's just a point to make that like this isn't the default way for humans to exist.
No, like at the time, what should have happened, and a lot of heretic movements tried to make happen, was to break down the land that was just of the Lord's, and if every little farm, every little village could have kept their own common land, those larger nuclei would have grown independently. Like they would have made what they needed, not just for themselves individually, but for the village. And so there's the baker that makes the bread for everyone, and there's the person that makes that raises cauliflower. It's the kind of it's the communal living. That is not how things went, unless in utopias, as you can tell. But yeah, the short version of all of these is because then children have just the main adults of parents, maybe grandparents, to rely upon, and not an entire village, and not the wisdom of an entire village or other people to go and ask. That's why if trauma comes and we have no way to have indeed someone to support us to work through it, it will create enduring effects. And when you have enduring effects from it, it will pass it down to other generations.
Yeah, you're taking what would normally be a river that can meander and cut its way through the land, and it can split off, and you can get other streams, and it can connect to other bodies of water into a canal.
Yeah.
And all the issues and the litter and the rubbish just get passed down this one channel that just stays in that same narrow way of being.
That being said, I have put together 4 points to discuss about I genuinely do hope that you do not come. I genuinely do hope that you do not come from familiar trauma. But
it is a trend in witchcraft.
Something that I have unfortunately noticed, even just ending up on other kind of YouTube, like we found the doctor in psychology recently that talks a lot about estrangement of children to parents, and it seems to be a new trend. I think what has happened, probably because we have more open communication, because millennials and Gen Z have sort of always been online, and so I've always had a chance to talk to other people about, like, again, the moment that you can reach more people and find out, oh, this doesn't happen just to me, this happens to you as well. Do you think it's right? Do you think it's fair? That I suspect gave us a chance to compare and confront our experiences with others and realize, talking together, that we've always been told that this is just how things are, but this is not right, and it's not the only way. There's
nothing more normal than your own childhood. Because it's all you know. It's the only experience that you have on it. And yeah, the number of conversations I've had in my life where someone says, yeah, I had a good childhood. Like, yeah, my da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And yeah, then you just see everyone's face in the room drop. Like, oh, no, that's not normal.
Like, did that just happen to us? Like, you tell a story that you think it's actually funny about your childhood, and everybody in the room, their face drop, and they go like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, are you okay? And you're like, oh, why are we making a fuss about this? Like, my parents always told me not to make a fuss about this, and now look at me, I laugh about it. And that's how we ignore and cement trauma. There's also a point, I will link the videos of Dr. Anna down in the description below, and I will link a couple of books about it. But there is indeed also a point to make about, I might personally sound so, devoid of feeling about parents, which in a way, from the information put together so far, I see in a position of managerial responsibility towards their children that almost comes from the higher levels of capitalism to them. And so the authority that they have, they can only impose on someone lower than them. And in proletariat capitalism, the only thing lower than an adult worker is whoever they made, so their children. So that there is an issue about being frustrated that you have this authority over you of the system and taking it out in the same way towards whoever you have that authority. Mm-hmm. Which it's what I mentioned in other videos. Ultimately, I believe that there are two kinds of people. One is the kind of person that something has happened to me and I survived, and I have survivor bias, and I think that everybody should go through trouble because, see, I survived and it made me the person that I am. Or there's the other kind of person that is like, shit, I survived this. Nobody should go through this shit. I will do my utmost best to make sure that nobody else has to go through what I've gone through. I will try to make the world better for next generations.
I think for us, like our form of breaking generational trauma probably is quite extreme in the sense of we're just not going to have kids.
Yeah.
like even if we wanted kids, we've had the discussion before of like neither of us is fit to raise a child in a way that would leave them better off than we were. Maybe a little bit, but like not enough. Like we still have our own issues, and I mean the amount of work that we need to do just to keep ourselves going, like the amount of energy we have to devote just for making ourselves okay to get through a day, is not something that can be shared with another life.
It's not. It wouldn't be fair. I understand that. Is that the meaning of Catch-22? Like, I think it's too full.
We're the most aware of all that stuff, but that doesn't mean that we have necessarily the ability to overcome those things.
But for what I understand, most people that have children do not even go through the self-questioning in this way. You have children because it's normal. It's what you're expected to do. What's wrong with you if you're not having children? Mm-hmm. There's a thing also to be said about, it's true, it's not natural to cut off ties. And that's the extreme way in which nothing else has worked. And then eventually you have to come to understand that you can either be in a cycle with someone that is never going to change because they have literally told you this is how things have always been done. Mm-hmm. And you're making a fuss and you're too sensitive. And you might just eventually decide, okay, I've tried everything else. If I just need to take care of myself, it would mean not to deal with this kind of constant attack on the person that I am and this constant denial of the experiences that I've gone through. And estrangements and going no contact, basically, which is my experience, has come after decades of my life spent believing that my mother was the best person in the world, that she has dedicated her life to me, and because of that, going with the delusion that you hear that you owe your parents your life. Which, let's dissect this for a moment, because the fact that we owe our lives to the people that have copulated to make us happen implies a gratitude that can only be fulfilled by giving our life back to them.
Which, is a threat that gets used. Like, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it. God, now I have to put them back.
Oh, you can keep them down, you can keep them up. No, okay.
This is the only position that I can be in.
Okay. Let me keep straight, go back a second. The issue that there is with that idea of gratitude because they conceived you and your mother carried you to term, it's the idea that if you owe gratitude to that, the only thing that you can give back of the same value is dedicating your entire life to the will of the people that have given you this gift. Whereas you had no word in, you never chose this. They, although, chose to have children, but this is never considered. It's this expectation of ownership. Like, I made you and I can as easily break you, which is indeed the kind of threat that some children have received.
Which I would always say, don't threaten me with a good time. You know?
So on this point of gratitude and you owe respect and you owe all of this, I would make the point that respect and obedience are two different things.
It's that classic thing that, like, some people view respect as to respect me as a person, and other people view respect as to respect my authority. And when they say, if you don't respect me, I won't respect you, what they actually mean is, if you don't respect my authority, I won't respect you as a person. Which, as
queer children, we have a lot of understanding of, don't we? So that's definitely a point to keep into consideration. Authority, obedience, and respect, different things, but very often, language-wise, they can be conflated by people that are just trying to put you under their thumb. Let's be very honest with it. And there's also a point that is not discussed that I therefore felt like bringing up, which is this concept of gratitude and owing stuff to parents. Realistically, on a practical, technical level, I genuinely do believe that we need to discuss more about the other way around. Legally, your parents owe you a roof and sustenance until you are 18, until you are their responsibility. The fact that some children get bills from their parents once they turn 18 about all the money that they spent to sustain them. Yes, no, that's an issue.
But we had to legally enforce that as the bare minimum that you must provide. And yet still you get parents saying things like, well, I put a roof over your head, therefore I can do what I want.
This idea that fundamental human rights are something that can be used as leverage and as threat to make you obey, it's exactly the same thing that capitalism does to do. And that's why I'm like, this perpetrates not only generationally, but from the system to the individual. Because this idea of there are fundamental needs that as a human you have: shelter, food, community and gregariousness, because we are still animals. And the fact that some of those are not given, there is homelessness. In America, they have paid for profit healthcare, which is mind-blowing. And we're getting there here as well. I really hope not. But the fact that these fundamental human rights that are the basics that you need to survive, to have a basic dignity. And those are used as leverages for, well, if you don't behave like I want, go to work, do whatever your parents say, I will take this away from you. It's blackmail that is never called that way, and because we think if somebody that is related to you says it, they have an entitlement to do it. And I genuinely think that the fact that this happens is how we justify how the entire capitalist system holds us hostage, with the fact that it doesn't matter that you do not support or believe in whatever kind of values or lack thereof that the business you work for has. I know that the system threatens you with homelessness if you don't come to work and you don't get your paycheck and you don't pay your landlord or you don't pay your mortgage. So that's all you need to know. You need to have the threat, and I don't care where your values go, because that's what, at the end of the day, will keep you with your head down doing what the system wants, which is like work and sell yourself, basically. We're all prostitutes, don't worry about that.
One of the criticisms that are made about coddling children is that it doesn't prepare children for the harshness of reality of modern life. And maybe we could do something about that.
Maybe we should do something about that.
Maybe there's a systemic solution that we could all work towards that would mean that we don't have to be shit to our children to get them ready and resilient.
For a shit world. So point one, I would say, try and break the given of you need to be grateful to your parents because they made you and they raised you.
Oh, right, we're giving points on how to help rather than just being in our own therapy.
I would definitely suggest you do start to consider the simple fact that, no, your parents made a decision, not you, of making you, and they owed you decency and dignity up until 18 at least. So that concept of whatever they want, whatever they say, you bend your head even if you know that it's wrong because they're your parents, because they made you. That is an abuse technique that we just have all fallen for. Point number 2 that connects. Your parents aren't always right just because they are your parents. However, having survived not only abusive parents but abusive relationships, I can tell you this in my own experience. There have been points in my relationship with people that tried to exert authority over me that was also based in some kind of affection, or so I thought, where I had that, I can check it in my journals, I had it, that moment that goes, oh, right and wrong have nothing to do with this anymore, because to keep myself safe, to keep my life safe, which was dependent on these people, I just need to appease them. Right and wrong don't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm right and if I can prove that I am right. Actually, maybe being right will make them more upset. What is important is not doing the right thing or the wrong thing. What is important is doing the thing that doesn't make them do bad things to me. Does that need an explanation as to why that's abuse?
No, that's fine.
So the idea that because people are in a position of authority compared to you does not mean that everything they say is right.
But again, so like the way to break that is about putting it out there into the world. Like, be wary of anyone that tries to, drag you away from friends, to try to remove you from community so that their voice is the only one that you hear. You need a wider pool of opinions and thoughts and feelings. And, not everyone in that wider pool is going to be correct, but that's why you have the wider pool, so you can get as many viewpoints as you possibly can.
And that is also how you start to break the cycle, in the sense that, I don't know if it ever happened to you, something that was very, very loud in my family was we do not air our dirty laundry. Because the implication was, if you speak ill of me, that I'm your mother, to anyone else, that will say that you are a bad daughter. Because what daughter would speak ill of their parents? So the way that the responsibility was immediately put on me, and I was like, oh, no, that will say that you're a bad person. So you do not tell anyone what I do. Having these kind of confrontations, talking to peers, like, yes, of course, it's always useful and great if we can afford a therapist that also has done the work to do the colonized therapy. But because that is a bit of a utopia in this day and age, peer review, like, going to your friends and talking about experiences and talking about, this happens to me, or this used to happen to me. What do you think? It's how you break the silence, and a lot of abuse thrives on this kind of silence. And the idea that exactly, like, no, what a parent says is untouchable because they're older, because authority. No.
There's an issue in peer groups as well, which is a result of the hyper-individualization of self-care. That, you're supposed to do whatever you can to look after your issues, but that never extends to accepting care from other people or giving care to other people, which is what it should be. It should be a collective self-care that we all do for each other. Now the new version of Don't Air Your Dirty Laundry is about not trauma dumping. And, yes, there is a point not to tell the cashier in Asda about everything horrible that happened to you in your life, but there also needs to be a point at a community level where we make space for that.
Yes.
There need to be places where you can do that. And yes, therapy exists and therapy is great. And if you can afford therapy and have access to it, that's wonderful. But if you don't, then it's our collective responsibility that we have these spaces that exist. And yes, you should only engage with it to a point that isn't then harming yourself. But at the same time, if we're shutting down these conversations and telling everyone to just deal it with themselves, or to just get therapy, which is this very private bubble, and your therapist can be abusive as well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's on all of us.
Which you might notice a trend by now. In the first point, the solution that we bring is, wasn't it better when children were raised by a village community? The solution here is wouldn't it be nice if it was a community responsibility to create spaces for people to air things and have a confrontation and find out if what happens is okay or not? Community. I am genuinely starting to think that the opposite of capitalism is not just socialism, because both are based on work, and I don't think that we exist to work.
Some kind of communitism.
I genuinely do believe that the opposite of capitalism is community, and that's the work that witchcraft does.
Not necessarily communism, because communism focuses a lot on labor.
Exactly. That's why.
That's why as a society, there's much more we can build upon.
That's my issue with socialism and communism, which really are the same thing. That's why Cuba is a communist country, but they call themselves socialist. Like, it's if anybody reads the Communist or Socialist Manifesto, like that's we're talking about the same thing. I still genuinely do not believe, as much as I consider myself a socialist, that is the solution to capitalism, because it's still based on work. And as human beings, I think the kind of work that we did to satisfy our needs and not to just make profit was what was supposed to happen. The fact that both socialism and capitalism are based on labor to produce, that's a bit of an issue for me at this point.
So one of the issues that I have in the LGBT community is I think they're a bit too gung-ho about saying, cut off your family. Right? Because that's all the advice that they give. Like, if your parents don't respect your identity, if they don't want to respect your gender, your pronouns, your sexuality, if they... I mean, yes, there's a point then where if your parents are kicking you out, you don't really have much of a choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find that it's a bit too straightforward, and they just go, oh, your parents aren't respecting your pronouns? Well, just cut them off and leave them and go be by yourself. Because being by yourself, when you're going through such like a massive process of self-discovery, can be deadly.
Yeah.
We aren't building the support structures.
Yes.
These community support structures, laying out these trampolines that everyone can actually land on if they're going to do something like that. And like, yeah, if you are trapped in that kind of horrible situation, like, firstly, so very sorry about that. But then, yeah, the first step isn't to isolate more. No. It's to reach out.
Absolutely.
Any way that you can.
Because genuinely, I don't think it's talked enough. Like, I can be very intolerant to socialization due to my neurodivergence. I burn out around people because my social battery is almost physical for me. That doesn't mean that we don't need anyone. And there's also this conflation of, oh, if you don't have family, then you're alone. And indeed, if there's no community, or if you don't know where to find the community, it's part of putting your ducks in a row. Mm-hmm. Because no, there's no delusion in thinking that as individuals, especially as individuals in late-stage capitalism, we can stand a chance on our own. And once again, the answer is community.
If you go back to the gay underground of the 80s, or the 70s and 80s, like, yeah, you would get people who had been kicked out of their home, but what did they find? Like, squats, yes. Essentially, right? Like, these communes where runaways could come and people would build their own families and their own systems around that. That's essentially the death of every community, is when it does get assimilated into the capitalist system, when it starts being isolationists and reductionists. So the
individualist and competitive. Competition, the idea of competitiveness, of being better or succeeding because somebody else is failing, is embedded in the cornerstone of capitalism.
And the fact that in witchcraft what we have as the ideal is the cottage in the woods at the edge of town. That's separating you from the town.
Do you think so? No, I always thought that like, it's the infamous, like, having your own room and then being close enough to reach out, though.
I take issue with the number of images that are built up for the cottagecore ideal, where it's a single house away from everything else, rather than being a house on a street. Yeah, no, that's fair. And I have no doubt that that's the way that capitalism is selling cottagecore, because they can sell everything. Yeah, like, if you turn to Roma communities, even when they buy houses, they buy the entire street. Yes. So that everyone lives out in the fronts, and the houses are places where you go for your kind of physical needs around cleanliness. Because even like cooking in the Roma communities
it's done outside.
In front of everyone. Yeah, there's just other ways to do it, and I get worried whenever I see someone saying, like, oh yeah, I want to live by myself in a house that's miles away from anyone else. No, that's true. It's not going to be as nice as you think it is. That's very true. Let's be
which is at the center of the high street.
Maybe we put that link to that, if I can find it again, that French commune of just women that was, I think eventually was like raided for being a commune of witches.
Yeah. Point the third. Your parents aren't above the law or common sense. This seems relevant when things like the threats that I was talking about before happen, and the idea that if a parent withholds love, which is not unconditional then, by chance, then it doesn't mean that you are wrong as a human being because you don't deserve the love that should be unconditional. So how much wrong can you be to not be deserving of love that technically you are told for all your life is unconditional from your parents? Because it's not. Yeah, this idea that if you disappoint them, if you don't do what they say, then there's this literal disappointment, like that, which literally implies then where you were told the trouble, which I do understand until you manage to establish your own personality and your own set of values, because those are the only values that you know about and you have witnessed throughout your entire childhood and life. You're like, well, if I cannot adhere to these, you have the perception that they have a right not to love you, and then you go in self-flagellation, which it's what, on top of all things, queer people experience. And that this belief that the wrongness is in you, because without having, again, the confrontation with anything else but the nuclear family, you think that the values of that family are the rules of life. And if there is the withholding of affection, which is supposed to be unconditional, we are told, then what's wrong with me? Which brings me to point the 4 very naturally. Your value is not and cannot be correlated to the amount of love and support that you get from your relatives. Because there's this belief that, love is unconditional, support should be unconditional, if it's withdrawn it's because I'm wrong. No, that's why that cycle is wrong. It's very nice, of course, if people that you have been quite literally programmed genetically to love don't like you or don't appreciate you or don't like choices that you make. Yes, it would be amazing if they do, but if they don't, it does not have to impact your perception of your own self-value. Which is why the best solution that I found to that was a sort of contract that you make with yourself in a very honest way. Once you understand what your values are, what you hold important and what you deem bad, and you have the moral honesty to admit, I will hold myself to these rules and I will hold other people to those, that is fairness. One of the issues that I see the most is when demands are made of children on the basis of authority, but it's the infamous a rule for me and another one for thee. I think the most intellectually honest thing that we can do is to understand where our values lie and hold ourselves and others to the same standard, which in a way is also complicated because sometimes I know that I hold myself to a higher standard than other people. Mm-hmm. Like in witchcraft, I don't know if it happens to you as well, everybody else is a valid witch, but when I have self-doubt about my power, it's always about me. I never have it about other people. So there should be, and it's a work in progress for everyone, this kind of intellectual honesty about having a standard that you live up to, and that's the same one that you hold others to. Because once you can have that comparison, you also naturally start to find people that share your values and that you can create a community with and then grow together. Guess what? Because the answer is community.
What is it?
Community.
What is it, Stella? What's the answer?
Community. Something that we literally just saw on Instagram while changing the battery was that Jean-Marie Le Pen?
Jean-Marie Le Pen.
Jean-Marie Le Pen died, which was the founder of the neo-fascist party in France, which made me immediately think, Marie Le Pen? And apparently Marie Le Pen is his daughter. You actually were like talking about.
Yeah, as I talk about a generational curse to be a fucking cunt.
And very, very quickly, like the entire point is indeed what we were talking about. Like, well, yeah, you're born into that family, Those are the principles of their family, and you are hardwired to please your parents because you know as a child that they keep you alive. And when that kind of imposing dependence is put on you, it's very, very hard to break. You want to please them, and you want to be what they want you to be because you will get that love. Because what kind of person are you if you don't deserve the love of your parents? And that's how you become a neo-fascist. We still had in Italy in the 90s, I think more recently, but I don't have updates, the Mussolini family with actual Mussolini surname being in politics. And guess what? On the right. That's the kind of thing that this kind of setting and expectations about doing without questioning what your parents and relatives say because they have authority over you. That's what it can lead to, because when you're given the option of, well, do I please them or do I become the black sheep? It takes a lot to do the latter, because again, the thought of what's wrong with me then if even my family cannot love me or decides, quite literally in that case, not to love and support you anymore. And on the other side, there's this idea that because you own your children, they need to be molded in the fashion that you want. You put them on this earth.
I mean, yeah, just look at Elon Musk and the comments that he made about his daughter being estranged, say that she's literally dead to him. To then, a few months later, he's buying compounds in Texas that he wants to move all of his children and the mothers of his children into one place so he can keep them all together in like some weird version of his idea of a commune
that he can have overlooking.
Yeah.
There's this idea that as children we are mini-me of our parents, and if we stray from the path of becoming like them or what they want of us, because either, sometimes the expectations, unfortunately too often the expectation is a child needs to become what I haven't become, or a child needs to continue in my footsteps and make me live a vicarious youth, a vicarious second life through them. And when that stuff happens and it comes from your parents, it's hard to say, but that's not right. Because again, it doesn't become about right and wrong anymore, but right is being deserving of their love. Anything that deviates from that becomes something that you are undeserving of, and therefore you are wrong. That's why in this video we try to deconflate those things. Like, no, having approval does not impact your value. Having or lacking approval does not impact your value. But I know it's hard because the love of our parents, it's hardwired in us, as in how we survive in the world. In all of this, are we suggesting that you do cord cutting, banishings, and all of that? By all means.
I think it's a great way to safeguard against the impacts of a generational curse. But yeah, I don't personally see those as the solution. I don't see that as breaking the curse. And neither is singing a 70s pop song together in a studio, as shown in Agatha All Along. But yeah, it's just diluting the bullshit. Just spread it out everywhere so that it's not this like concentrated channel that goes in a straight line down through the family. I don't think you'll ever really get rid of things completely. There's always going to be stuff that you have to deal with, but it's just so much easier to deal with it when you have people you can rely on.
Yeah, and genuinely, by all means, if you would like for us to discuss then the magical way of taking things into your hands, like banishments, like cord cuttings, by all means, leave a comment and we'll do a video about that. But I think this was mostly trying to do an analysis of where do these actually come from. It's not just something that has been sent to you by an evil witch generations ago to your grandparents, and so it sticks with you. That's the kind of bad, evil stories that we told about witches because we needed to fear them. A generational curse is what you cannot get out of habit and of dependence and of addiction in a way to that kind of trauma and to that kind of pain, because nobody has stopped, looked around and said, but this is not right. And until you free your mindset, very much It's the entire point of witchcraft. It's the entire point of shadow work, like we were saying in the beginning. Until you break that mindset, you're hardly going to be in a position where you can actually start to do the work to make sure that you do not do unto others what has been done to you. And until the next video, I really hope that we can hex the capitalistic patriarchy together, because that's where all the problems come from, and there's a lot of need for it.
Yeah, hex your dads.